Going to review the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It is, again, welcome to our Amazon Live audience. Today I'm going to review the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I have this much to finish, but Darren just pointed out to me, but that's okay because I can't really reveal the end of the book anyway, right? So it'll be a mystery until I'm done with this, and then I will be reading every last page as I've done all morning. Wow, where do you even begin to describe or do a summary on a book like this? It is just so layered and so rich with a love story and self-discovery story and a story of wisdom and evolution and growth. It's just fascinating. So, here officially, according to the cover, is just an initial description, and then we'll go through it. So, Paulo Coelho's enchanting novel has inspired a devoted following around the world. This story, dazzling in its powerful simplicity and soul-stirring wisdom, is about an Andalusian shepherd boy named Santiago who travels from his homeland in Spain to the Egyptian desert in search of a treasure buried near the pyramids. Along the way, he meets a gypsy woman, a man who calls himself king, an alchemist, all of whom point Santiago in the direction of his quest. No one knows what the treasure is or if Santiago will be able to surmount the obstacles in his path. But what starts out as a journey to find worldly goods turns into a discovery of the treasure found within. Lush, evocative, and deeply humane, the story of Santiago is an eternal testament to the transforming power of our dreams and the importance of listening to our hearts. Oh, that's really a great summary. It's riveting at every page. I didn't want to take my eyes off of it. Um, it's like you're living a movie as you're reading this book. You see, uh, it's so rich in the descriptions of how it is. The journeys, the individual journeys that he's going on, that you feel like you're riding along on the camel with him, or on the horse, or on the train, or whatever that particular segment of the leg of the story is. So it's divided into two chapters. By the way, the book is 25 years old, more than that. That was in 2014. They were celebrating the 25-year anniversary. So again, almost 30 years, yeah, probably 30 years old now. Part one is sort of his young journey at the beginning, and then part two is sort of when he starts on his adult journey, if you will. And so there's all the character development in the early beginnings of the book. I had no idea what to expect. I thought that this would be like a lot of the books that I'm reading, which are like positive psychology, sort of business books, that sort of thing. This one is an adventure. It was just so rich in so many ways. So if you're joining me on Amazon Live, I'm just going to make sure it's highlighted in the carousel for you. The Alchemist, there you have it. And if you're joining me on Facebook Live, I'll put it into the comments. So, such a wonderful read. How many times have you heard about this book? So many people have recommended it to me through classes that I've taken, or just, when you're thumbing through on some of the different social media pages, and books are recommended for what to read. This just kept coming up again and again and again. So we pulled the trigger. Kasha was here with me one day. We pulled the trigger and said, okay, let's just order it. So I decided today was the day. So the book, interestingly enough, sat on a shelf in Brazil and only sold one copy, and then was sold a second copy was sold to the same person that bought the first copy. And then years and years later, as fate would have it, it went on to become one of, as the author says, the 10 most influential books of the last century. How amazing is that, right? I think, I would guess, because of the way that it's written, it is just such beautiful language that's in here. So let's get started. All right. So again, it's the story of Santiago, who is a shepherd boy, and he does the same thing day after day after day with his sheep. And they're concerned with is food and water, back and forth day by day. And then he starts to have this sort of longing. Um, he talks to a woman and she says, you came so you could learn about your dreams, said the old woman. Dreams are the language of God, and he speaks in our language. I can interpret what he said. So he meets with a gypsy who tells him she can interpret his dreams. And he has a dream about going to find treasure near the pyramids. He paused for a moment to see if the woman knew what the Egyptian pyramids were, but she said nothing. And then the Egyptian pyramids become sort of the center of the quest that he's on, where he's going to look for his dreams near the Egyptian pyramids. When someone sees the same people every day, as it happened with him at the seminary, they wind up becoming part of that person's life. And when they want that person to change, and then they want that person to change, if someone isn't what others want them to be, the others become angry. Everyone seems to have a clear idea of how other people should lead their lives, but none about his or her own. So he has this sort of epiphany through being a shepherd, doing the same thing day after day after day, that he wants to, uh, he realizes if he doesn't do something differently, um, then, or is his longing to do something differently, let's say. So he realizes he's going to have to move in the direction of this treasure that is near these pyramids. And then he goes on to meet an old man who talks about an important book. The old man wanted to talk, and he asked what the boy what he was reading. The boy was tempted to be rude and move to another bench, but his father had taught him to respect the elderly. So the uh, they start talking about this book. Uh, he says, it's a book that says the same thing almost all other books in the world say, continued the old man. It describes people's inability to choose their own personal legends. This then becomes the general theme of the book, Santiago's personal legend. And it ends up saying that everyone believes the world's greatest lie. What is the world's greatest lie? The boy asked, completely surprised. It's this, that at a certain point in our lives, we lose control of what's happening to us, and our lives become controlled by fate. That is the world's greatest lie. Fascinating, right? Just fascinating. That never happened to me, the boy said. They wanted me to be a priest, but I've decided to become a shepherd. Much better, said the old man, because you really like to travel. He knew what I was thinking, the boy said to himself. The old man, meanwhile, was leafing through the book without seeming to want to return it at all. The boy noticed that the man's clothing was strange. He looked like an Arab, which was not unusual in those parts. Africa was only a few hours away from Tarifa. And so the story goes on. The old man and the boy have this conversation, and turns out the old man is the king of Salem. And he says, what do I do? What do I do in Salem? The old man laughs. Well, I'm the king of Salem. People say strange things, the boy thought. Sometimes it's better to be with the sheep who don't say anything, and better still to be alone with one's books. They tell incredible stories at the time when you want to hear them. There's such beautiful foreshadowing in this book. They tell their incredible stories at the time when you want to hear them. I think alluding to, right, the fact that we're reading The Alchemist. It's just, so beautifully woven together like a tapestry. The boy didn't know what a person's personal legend was. It's what you have always wanted to accomplish. Everyone, when they are young, knows what their personal legend is. At that point in their lives, everything is clear and everything is possible. And then he goes on to talk about it's a force that appears to be negative, but actually shows you how to realize your personal legend. It prepares your spirit and your will because there's one great truth on this planet. Whoever you are, whatever it is that you do, when you really want something, it's because that desire originated in the soul of the universe. It's your mission on earth. To realize one's personal legend is a person's only real obligation. All things are one. And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it. Oh, that theme runs through, it's probably said at least a good 10 times in the book. When you really want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. Oh, it's just beautiful. So he goes on um, to receive a gift from this old king, and as they part ways, he says, the old man leafed through the book and fell to reading a page he came to. The boy waited and then interrupted the old man, just as he himself had been interrupted. Why are you telling me this? Because you are trying to realize your personal legend, and you are at the point where you are about to give it all. And that's when you always appear on the scene. The boy says to the old man, not always in this way, but I always appear in one form or another. Sometimes I appear in the form of a solution or a good idea. Other times it's a critical moment. I make it easier for things to happen. There are other things I do too. But most of the time, people don't even realize I've done them. Mm. People learn early in their lives what is their reason for being. If you start out by promising and then he goes through a trade off of some things that he has to give away. And each time that he gives away something, he learns something. And then each lesson builds on the lesson before, and it just becomes this magical journey. And then there's a portion that talks about omens, and as they're talking about omens, a butterfly appears right between the old man and Santiago. And he says, don't forget that everything you deal with is only one thing and nothing else. Don't forget the language of omens. And above all, don't forget to follow your personal legend through to its conclusion. So he goes again, continuing on his journey. And then he sees these beautiful omens along the way, some in the form of swords. He goes on to have his life savings taken from him, stolen from him, sort of hits the symbolic or rock bottom, if you will. And and then there's just these beautiful moments where where the story pauses, and then there's like a paragraph of an epiphany. Now he understood why the owner of the bar had been so upset. He was trying to tell him not to trust that man. That man ended up being the man who stole his money. He says, I'm like everyone else. I see the world in terms of what I would like to see happen and not what actually does. It's just filled with those filters of how we see the world and kind of pointing them out. So he ends up with two stones, almost like a talisman or like a pendulum that help him decipher and discern what is right and what is wrong. But the old man king tells him that he always knows inside of him, he always knows to make his own decision is best. But if he needs help, he can use the stone. Then he goes on to, in part two of the book, now he's traveling and he's on his journey, and he's left the sheep behind, his shepherd life behind. So he goes and um, does the next thing that is in front of him. He needs to eat, so he volunteers to clean some windows so that he can get some food. And while he's there, he ends up on a multi-year journey of working for the gentleman that owns the store, and he cleans the glass there. He says, there was a moment, the book says, there was a moment of silence so profound that it seemed the city was asleep. No sound from the bazaars, no argument from the merchants, no men climbing to the towers to chant, no hope, no adventure, no kings, no personal legends, no treasures, no pyramids. It was if the world had fallen silent because the boy's soul had. Ooh, it sent chills through my body. Okay, part two. So he meets this storekeeper, and the storekeeper asks him, "Why did you want to get to the pyramids?" Because I've always heard about them," the boy answered, saying nothing about his dream. The treasure was now nothing but a painful memory, and he tried to avoid thinking about it. "I don't know anyone around here who would want to cross the desert just to see the pyramids," said the merchant. "They're just a pile of stones. You could build one in your backyard." "You've never had dreams of travel?" said the boy, turning to wait on a customer who had entered the shop. And so the story goes, they have this conversation. He stays there. He talks about his Muslim upbringing and is that right? Sorry, he talks about the prophet. The prophet gave us the Quran. So there's lots of religions that are woven through, kind of tied together in this book. The prophet gave us the Quran and left us just 5 obligations to satisfy during our lives. The most important is to believe in the one true God. So this is the merchant talking to the little boy. And the others are to pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, and be charitable to the poor. So he stopped there, his eyes filled with tears as he spoke of the prophet. He was a devout man, and even with all of his impatience, he wanted to live a life in accordance with Muslim law. "What's the fifth obligation?" the boy asked. "2 days ago, you said I had never dreamed of travel," the merchant answered. "The fifth obligation of every Muslim is a pilgrimage. We are obliged at least once in our lives to visit the holy city of Mecca." So, as he meets these individual characters on his journey, they have these conversations about their dreams and their hopes and their personal legends. And they influence one another as their lives are intertwined to move them in each individually in the direction they're meant to go. So then he stays and works with the man for a while. "The shop is the size I always wanted it to be. I don't want to change anything because I don't know how to deal with change. I'm used to the way I am. Today I understand something I didn't see before. Every blessing ignored becomes a curse. I don't want anything else in life, but you're forcing me to look at wealth and horizons I've never known. Now that I have seen them, and now that I see how immense my possibilities are, I'm going to feel worse than I did before you arrived because I know the things I should be able to accomplish, and I don't want to do so." So on he goes. And then there becomes another sort of symbol that's written in to many chapters. He says, "There are probably things in the world that sheep can't teach me," the boy thought as he regarded the old merchant. "All they ever really do is look for food and water. And maybe it wasn't that they were teaching me, but I was learning from them." "Mekta," the merchant said finally. "What does that mean?" "You would have to have been born an Arab to understand," he answered. "But in your language, it would mean something like 'it is written.'" So, "it is written" comes up as a theme each time he hits the next milestone or the next lesson, or not even the next. It could be a lateral journey for him as well. And the language is so beautifully written that it's just leads you to the next page. It's hard to put the book down. It was the language of enthusiasm, of things accomplished with love and purpose, and as part of a search for something believed in and desired. And here's the theme again: when you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it, the old king had said. It's almost as if he had been here and left his mark, he thought, and yet none of these people had ever met the old king. On the other hand, he said that he always appeared to help those who are trying to realize their personal legend. And then he talks about it's probably time to head back to or toward the pyramids. And yet the boy felt there was another way to regard his situation. He was actually 2 hours closer to his treasure. The fact that the 2 hours had stretched into an entire year didn't matter. I know why I want to go back to my flock, he thought. I understand sheep. They're no longer a problem, and they can be good friends. On the other hand, I don't know if the desert can be a friend. It's in the desert I have to search for my treasure. If I don't find it, I can always go home. I finally have enough money, and I have all the time I need. Why not? So he goes toward the desert on his journey to join a caravan that's going to cross the desert. He meets a man who's looking for an alchemist, a man who has a treasure trove of books. Could you imagine hauling books across the desert on a camel? He says he was only able to understand one thing. Making a decision was only the beginning of things. When someone makes a decision, he's really diving into a strong current. This might be my favorite quote of the book. He's really diving into a strong current that will carry him to places he had never dreamed of when he made the when he made the decision. He says, it's a good luck omen, the Englishman said. If I could, I'd write a huge encyclopedia about just the words luck and coincidence. It's with those words that the universal language is written. And then they begin to start talking about the universal language and what that means. There are a lot of different people here, and each has his own God. But the God I serve is Allah. So now this is the leader of the caravan talking. And he encourages the group before they're going to caravan across the desert to each pray to their own individual God and and swear that they will be in allegiance to one another. I guess the one biggest rule if you're crossing the desert is that you have to obey the person who's leading the group because they know the way. So he says there was a murmur from the crowd. Each was swearing quietly to his or her own God. The boy swore to Jesus Christ. The Englishman said nothing, and the murmur lasted longer than a simple vow would have. These people were also praying for heaven for protection. So he goes on. The closer one gets to realizing his personal legend, the more that personal legend becomes his true reason for being, thought the boy. All right. The boy was beginning to understand that intuition. Okay, here it is, my favorite. The boy was beginning to understand that intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, where all the histories of people are connected and we are all able to know everything because it's all written there. Oh, it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. The boy was beginning to understand that intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, where all the histories of people are connected and we are able to know everything because it's all written there. But this all happened for one basic reason. No matter how many detours and adjustments are made, the caravan moved toward the same compass point. I love that. I think of Stephen Covey and his True North as he describes it. So many different references in this that come back to this book for me. Although the boy had developed a superstition that each time he opened a book, he would learn something important, he decided it was an unnecessary burden. So he could choose whether he wanted to read more books or not. Um, then it goes on, but the disaster taught me to understand the word of Allah. People need not fear the unknown if they're capable of achieving what they need and want. Again, another one of those lessons just sort of dropped in here. People People need not fear the unknown if they are capable of achieving what they need and want. Each one of these you could just stop and ponder all day long. It's such an incredible journey to be on. We're afraid of losing what we have, whether it's our life, our possessions, and property, but this fear evaporates when we understand that our life stories and the history of the world were written by the same hand. So the caravan goes on, and he says, we make a lot of detours, but we're always heading for the same destination. And you ought to read more about the world, says the Englishman. Books are like caravans in that respect. There was a full moon, and the boy told the Englishman the story of his life. The Englishman was fascinated about the part where the progress he achieved at the crystal shop after the boy had been working there. That's the principle that governs all things, he said. It's alchemy. It's called the soul of the world. When you want something with all of your heart, that's when you're closest to the soul of the world. It's always a positive force. He also said that this was not just a human gift, but that everything on the face of the earth had a soul, whether it was a mineral, a vegetable, an animal, or even just a simple thought. Everything on the earth is being continuously transformed because the earth is alive and it has a soul. We are part of that soul, so we rarely recognize that it is working for us. Such a fascinating story. If either of us had joined this caravan based on only personal courage, but without understanding this language, the journey would have been so much more difficult. So it goes on to talk about these beautiful phrases of the personal journey and the soul of the world and the masterwork. He says, the book that most interested the boy told the stories of famous alchemists. They were men who had dedicated their entire lives to the purification of metals in their laboratories, and they believed that if metal were heated for many years, it would free itself of all of the individual properties, and what would be left would be the soul of the world. This soul of the world allowed them to understand anything on the face of the earth because it was the language with which all things communicated. They called that discovery the master work. It was part liquid and part solid. You have a mania for simplifying everything, says the Englishman to the boy. Alchemy is a serious discipline. And then he goes on. The boy learned that the liquid part of the masterwork is called the elixir of life, and that it cured all illnesses. It kept the alchemists from growing old. And the solid part was called the philosopher's stone. It's not easy to find the philosopher's stone, said the Englishman. The alchemists spent years in their laboratories observing the fire that purified the metals. So the story goes. So it is a journey and a ride you go on with Santiago as he grows up and soon comes to fall in love. And the language of the love story is so beautiful. He talks about how the boy thought about the crystal merchant. He had said it was a good thing for the boy to clean the crystals so that he could free himself from negative thoughts. Like cleaning the windows, cleaning the glass was like a reset for him, like get the cobwebs out, right? It was to free himself from negative thoughts. The boy was becoming more and more convinced that alchemy could be learned in one's own daily life. He thought that with some patience, he'd be able to transform everything into gold. So he says, why do we make things so complicated? He asked the Englishman. So that those who have, this is beautiful, so that those who have the responsibility for understanding can understand, he said. Imagine if everyone went around transforming lead into gold, gold would lose its value. It's only for those who are persistent and willing to study things deeply who achieve the master work. I learned that the world has a soul and that whoever understands that soul could also understand the language of things. I learned that many alchemists realized their personal legends and wound up discovering the soul of the world, the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. But above all, I learned that these things are all so simple that they could be written on the surface of an emerald. Because I don't live in either my past or my future, I'm interested only in the present. Oh my gosh, how many books have I read since January 1st that have talked about only being in the present? The Secret about awareness, slowing down with some Deepak Chopra, The Secret of Happiness, being about being present. If you can concentrate always on the present, you'll be a happy man. You'll see that there is life in the desert, that there are stars in the heavens, that the tribesmen fight because they are part of the human race. Life will be a party for you, a grand festival, because life is the moment we're living right now. Oh, I could go on and on and on. So, The Alchemist. If you love what you've been listening to, what I'm sharing with you, as much as I do, let me invite you to select this. It's in your carousel on Amazon Live. Just double checking here. I've highlighted it for you in your carousel. Again, I love this. Are there any black magic in this book? I don't hear about black magic in this book. I haven't. Caitlin, a person's life plays out in different instances that lead to what the future will be. It's all written just to notice it early in life. You get what you deserve, good or bad, and in between. Um, I thank you for following me here on Amazon Live. The really gifted live in secrecy, Caitlin says. Oh, fascinating. I love the dialogue, the chat going on here. I think that's the beauty of The Alchemist, right? Because it has so many levels of interpretation. It has so many lessons of, yes, maybe learning young or knowing inside of you what your journey is when you're young, and then stumbling somewhere along the way and getting off your path, but then getting back on your path, and then people that come into your life for a reason or for a moment or for a journey, and then how he says two hours turned into 2 years or something to that effect, that lesson sort of was a pause in the journey. It's just, I'm so excited that you are enjoying this as much as I have, and you're loving the journey here. Isn't it fascinating? The present. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for being here. I love that you're sharing so much in the chat. And Jay, thank you so much for being here as well. How fun is this to contemplate these uh, big, beautiful, amazing lessons and ideas? Okay, so let's move forward. Again, thank you for being here. If you're joining me on Facebook Live, thank you as well. I hope you are finding this philosophical journey as interesting as I am. So, but none of it mattered to the alchemist. He had seen so many people come and go, and the desert remained as it was. He had kings and beggars walking the desert sands. He had seen kings and beggars walking the desert sands. The dunes were changing constantly by the wind, but these were the same sands he had known since he was a child. He always enjoyed seeing the happiness that the travelers experienced when, after weeks of seeing the yellow sand and blue sky, they first saw the green of the date palms. Maybe God created the desert so that man could appreciate the date trees, he thought. It wasn't exactly that they were secrets. God revealed his secrets easily to all creatures. He only had explanation for this fact. Things have been transmitted this way because they were made up from pure life. That this kind of life cannot be captured in pictures or in words because people become fascinated with pictures and words and wind up forgetting the language of the world. All right. So it goes on. He talks about his dreams and interpreting his dreams. When it's time to eat, eat. When it's time to move along, move along. The lessons that he learned from the camel driver. It's so simple, right? When it's time to eat, eat. When it's time to move along, move along. Something older than humanity, more ancient than the desert, something that had exerted the same force whenever two pairs of eyes met, had had theirs here as well. She smiled, and that was certainly an omen, the omen that he had been waiting for all of his life. The omen he had sought to find with his sheep, with his books, with his crystals in the silence of the desert. It was the pure language of the world. It required no explanation. At that moment, it seemed to him that time stood still and the soul of the world surged within him. When he looked into her dark eyes, and he saw that her lips, this is so beautiful, he saw that her lips were poised between laugh and silence. Between laugh and silence, he learned the most important part of the language that all the world spoke, the language that everyone on earth was capable of understanding in their heart. It was love. So he finds love. The language of that love story is worth 20 times the price of the book. It's just amazing the way it's so descriptive, and you feel like you're standing there watching watching them at the time when they meet. It was the pure language of the world. It required no explanation, just as the universe needs none as it travels through endless time. When the boy what the boy felt at that moment was that he was in the presence of the only woman in his life, and that, with no need for words, she recognized the same thing. There had only been that moment and that incredible certainty that everything under the sun has been written by one hand only. It is in the hand that evokes love and creates a twin soul for every person in the world. Without such love, one's dreams would have no meaning. Beautiful love story. So the story goes on. I'm going to wait here for you every day, he says to her. And then he starts to hear of a war coming. So they're at the oasis. They're partway through the desert. He's on his journey to get to the Alchemist, which is, of course, Santiago, the young boy, on his journey to get to the pyramids to find his treasure. And there are powerful forces on both sides. The war is important to both armies. It's not a battle of good against evil. It's a war between forces that are fighting for the balance of power. And that when that type of balance begins, it lasts longer than others because Allah is on both sides. So there's a war coming, and he meets another friend who tells him that Fatima, the woman that he has met, knows that warriors have to go on their journeys, paraphrasing here, and that it's Maktab, that it is written that he needs to go on, continue on his journey, and she knows that. So to, this is the first phase of the job. He said, I have to separate out the sulfur. To do that successfully, must have no fear of failure. It was my fear of failure that first kept me from attempting the master work. Now that I'm beginning what I could have started 10 years ago, but I'm happy at least I didn't wait another 20. So he goes on to see birds flying, and he sees a symbol there. He's thinking maybe the birds could explain to him the meaning of love without ownership. He felt sleepy. In his heart, he wanted to remain awake, but he also wanted to sleep. I'm learning the language of the world, and everything in the world is beginning to make sense to me, even in the flight of hawks, he said to himself. And in that mood, he was grateful to be in love. When you're in love, things make even more sense, he thought. So beautiful. Uh, Suddenly, one of the hawks made a flashing drive through the sky, attacking the other. As it did so, a sudden fleeting image came to the boy, an army with its swords at ready, riding into the oasis. So he sees this premonition while he's, lost in his days of love, and realized that it's an omen. So he knew that given anything on the face of this earth that could reveal all things. So this is really, made me pause for a moment. He says, the camel driver understood what the boy was saying. He knew that given anything on the face of the earth, it could reveal the history of all things. So fascinating. One could open a book to any page, or look into a person's hand, or one could turn a card, or watch the flight of birds, or whatever the thing observed, one could find a connection with his experience of the moment. Fascinating. It's such a beautiful way of talking about all things being connected. Actually, it wasn't those things in themselves revealing anything at all. It was just that the people looking at what was occurring around them could find a means of penetration into the soul of the world. Fascinating. So the tribesmen lived only for the present because the present was full of surprises. They had to be aware of many things. Where was the enemy's sword? Where was his horse? What kind of blow is he going to have next in the battlefield? And if good things are coming, they will be a pleasant surprise. So the seer, if bad things are, and you know in advance, you'll suffer greatly before they occur. So again, going back to being in the present. And men always live their lives based on the future. The secret is here in the present. If you pay attention to the present, you can improve upon it. And if you improve on the present, what comes later will also be better. So the story goes on and on. I think that that may be one of the best places to leave it. Because from here, he gets a premonition. He goes on to talk to the tribe leader to share his premonition that he thinks that there's war coming. And he has to um, put his life on the line to see if this is true, if his premonition is actually true. Fatima is a woman of the desert, said the alchemist. She knows that men have to go away in order to return, and she already has her treasure. It's you. Now she expects that you will find whatever it is that you're looking for. And then there's a great lesson here. What will happen if I decide to stay? Let me tell you what will happen. You'll be in the country as a counselor of the oasis. You'll have enough gold to buy many sheep and many cattlemen. You'll marry Fatima. You'll both be happy for a year. You'll learn to love the desert and you'll get to know every one of the 50,000 palms. You'll watch them as they grow, demonstrating better understanding. Sometime in the second year, you'll remember about your treasure. The omen will begin insistently to you to speak of it, and then you try to ignore it. Then in the third year, the omens will continue to speak of your treasure in your personal legends, and you'll walk around night after night at the oasis. Fatima will be unhappy because she'll feel it was she who interrupted your quest. And then maybe you could have left. Maybe you could have trusted more in your love for Fatima, because what kept you at the oasis was your own fear that you might never come back. At that point, the omens will tell you that your treasure is buried forever. Then, sometime during the fourth year, the omens will abandon you because you've stopped listening to them. You must understand that love never keeps a man from pursuing his personal legend. If he abandons that pursuit, it's because it wasn't true love, the love that speaks the language of the world. So, again, these recurring ideas, right, to let things go. And if it's meant to be, they come back to you. Oh, so fascinating. Listen to your heart. It knows all things because it came from the soul of the world. Why do we have to listen to our hearts? The boy asked when they made camp that day, because wherever your heart is, that's where you'll find your treasure. And then he goes on with these beautiful passages about connecting with his heart and listening to his heart. And when he listened to his heart, he has this journey of sadness and sort of evolution as it's described. It's just beautiful. Well, then, why should I listen to my heart? Because you will never again be able to keep it quiet. Even if you pretend not to have heard what it tells you, it will always be there inside you, repeating to you what you're thinking about life and about the world. You mean I should listen to it even if it's uh, treasonous? Treason is a blow that comes unexpectedly. If you knew your heart well, it will never be able to do that because you'll know its dreams and its wishes, and you'll know how to deal with them. You'll never be able to escape from your heart. So the boy continued to listen to their heart as they crossed the desert. And and then he goes on to talk about his heart suffering being away, and every second of the search that he is in communion, if you will, with his heart is an encounter with God. He was quiet with his heart for an entire afternoon. It was said that all people who are happy have God within them, and that happiness could be found in a grain of sand from the desert, as the alchemist has said. But a grain of sand is a moment of creation, and the universe has taken millions of years to create it. Everyone on earth has a treasure that awaits him, their personal legend. I'm going to leave it there with this because I think it is such a beautiful inspiration, such a beautiful thought, written in such a lovely language and so many layers of interesting thoughts. So, again, I want to say thank you so much for being in the chat with me. And if you love what we're exploring here, let me invite you to select this from the carousel and put it into your cart. Buy it, own it, read it. I think you'll love it. I think I could read it again and again and have different lessons each time. It's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It is a book of 30 years ago, but continuing to be one that is recommended time and time again. And it's a fairly easy read, but so much amazing contemplation that is available for you with it. So I hope you have a beautiful Saturday. Enjoy the inspiration, and I'll see you next time on Facebook Live and YouTube Live and Amazon Live right here at noon tomorrow with another book summary. We'll see you then.